The shadow in the spotlight, Vivian Hart, had perfected the art of disappearing in plain sight. In the sprawling Gold Coast mansion she shared with her husband, Marcus Ashford, she moved like morning mist, present but never quite seen. The limestone walls and Italian marble floors echoed with emptiness, a fitting backdrop for a woman who had become a ghost in her own life. Marcus Ashford was Chicago's real estate titan, a man whose name appeared in bold print on skyscrapers throughout the city. His face graced the covers of business magazines, his opinions quoted in economic forecasts. At 42, he possessed the kind of commanding presence that made boardrooms fall silent and competitors nervous. Vivienne, his wife of 4 years, possessed something far less valuable in his eyes, a last name that had sealed a crucial merger between Ashford Properties and Hart Development, the company her late father had built. The marriage had been a transaction, disguised as a romance. Her father, weakened by illness and desperate to secure his company's legacy, had orchestrated the union before his death. Marcus had gotten controlling interest in prime waterfront properties. Vivienne had gotten a wedding ring and a lifetime of being treated like outdated furniture. She dressed in muted tones, wore her honey-colored hair in a simple ponytail, and spoke only when directly addressed. Marcus preferred it that way. At charity galas and business dinners where her presence was unavoidable, he introduced her with barely concealed disdain. "My wife, Vivienne," he would say, the words tasting sour in his mouth, before immediately pivoting to more interesting conversation partners. What Marcus didn't know was that Vivienne held degrees in architecture and urban planning from Columbia. He didn't know she spent her lonely evenings analyzing property markets and investment portfolios. He didn't know that the simple girl from the suburbs he had, married, could calculate compound interest in her head and read financial statements like poetry. He had never bothered to ask. The breaking point came on a Tuesday evening in early autumn. Marcus was hosting his monthly poker night, a gathering of Chicago's most powerful men in his private study. Vivienne had retired to the library next door, a book on sustainable urban development open in her lap. The heavy oak door between the rooms was slightly ajar, and voices drifted through like poison gas. "Marcus, you crafty devil," came the smooth voice of Graham Sinclair, Marcus's longtime rival in the commercial real estate market. "I've got to hand it to you. Marrying the Hart girl to get those waterfront parcels was pure genius. Ruthless, but genius." Laughter rippled through the room. Vivienne's fingers tightened on her book. "What can I say?" Marcus replied, and she could hear the smugness in his voice. "Sometimes you've got to take one for the team." The property portfolio was worth the sacrifice. "Sacrifice?" Another voice chimed in. "Come on, Marcus. She's not that bad." "Please." Marcus's voice dripped with contempt. "She's about as exciting as watching paint dry. I keep her out of the spotlight as much as possible. Last thing I need is clients seeing me with that plain Jane and wondering if I'm losing my edge. A man is judged by the woman on his arm, gentlemen. Vivienne is strictly a behind-the-scenes asset." The laughter that followed was cruel and casual. They were discussing her like a bad stock pick, a regrettable business decision that had at least yielded acceptable returns. Vivienne closed her book with trembling hands. She had endured 4 years of coldness, 4 years of being invisible. But this casual cruelty, this public mockery among his peers, ignited something deep within her that she hadn't felt since her father's death. Rage. She stood slowly, her reflection catching in the darkened window. A plain woman in a beige cardigan stared back at her. But behind those hazel eyes, something ancient and powerful was awakening. Marcus wanted an asset? Fine. She would show him exactly what kind of asset she could be, but not on his terms. Never again on his terms. Vivienne walked silently to her bedroom, the one at the opposite end of the mansion from Marcus's master suite. She sat at the antique writing desk her grandmother had left her and pulled out her laptop. Her fingers flew across the keyboard, accessing accounts Marcus knew nothing about. The inheritance from her mother's side of the family. The investment portfolio she had been quietly managing for years. The trust fund her grandmother had protected from her father's merger negotiations. She wasn't just comfortable. She was wealthy. Independently, secretly wealthy. A slow smile crossed her face as she opened a new browser window and typed a name into the search bar. Helena Moreau. The legendary Parisian consultant who had transformed European socialites and businesswomen for 3 decades before retiring to a private practice that accepted only the most determined clients. Helena didn't create beauty. She excavated power that was already there, buried under years of self-doubt and society's expectations. Vivienne found a contact number and checked her watch. 3 in the morning in Paris. She didn't care. The phone rang 4 times before a crisp, accented voice answered. "Oui, Madame Moreau," Vivienne said, her voice steady and clear. "My name is Vivienne Hart. My husband thinks I'm a plain Jane, a behind-the-scenes asset. I'm calling to prove him catastrophically wrong." There was a pause, then a low, appreciative laugh. "How catastrophically are we talking, ma chérie?" "I want him to look at me and not recognize his own wife. I want to walk into a room and make him invisible. I want every person who ever dismissed me to question their own judgment." "Ah," Helena purred. "You do not want transformation. You want revolution?" "Yes," Vivienne breathed. "Exactly that. When is your deadline?" "The Founders' Ball. 6 weeks from tonight." Another pause. "That is very ambitious." "I'm a very motivated woman, Madame Moreau." The laughter that came through the phone was rich and knowing. "Pack a bag, Vivienne Hart. Tomorrow you fly to Paris. We have work to do." The Metamorphosis, the private transformation facility, was located in the 7th arrondissement, hidden behind an unmarked door on a quiet street lined with chestnut trees. Helena Moreau's studio was nothing like Vivienne had imagined. There were no racks of designer clothes, no walls of mirrors. Instead, the space resembled a sophisticated laboratory where human potential was studied and unlocked. Helena herself was a striking woman in her late 50s, with silver hair cut in a precise bob and eyes that seemed to see through pretense directly into the soul. She circled Vivienne slowly on that first morning, her gaze clinical yet somehow kind. "You hide behind softness," Helena observed, her French accent lending weight to each word. "The cardigans, the ponytail, the neutral colors, these are not choices of comfort. These are camouflage. You have been trying to disappear because visibility brought pain. Yes?" Vivienne felt tears prick her eyes but refused to let them fall. "Yes. Good. Honesty is where we begin. Now, tell me about the woman you were before Marcus Ashford convinced you that you were nothing." The question unlocked something in Vivienne. For hours, she talked while Helena listened. She spoke about her childhood dreams of designing sustainable communities, her academic achievements that her father had praised but Marcus had dismissed as irrelevant. She confessed her secret financial successes, the portfolio worth $7 million that she had built through careful investments in green technology and urban renewal projects. Helena's eyes gleamed with satisfaction. "You are not becoming someone new, ma chérie. You are remembering who you always were. Now we rebuild from this truth." The transformation was systematic and rigorous. Helena brought in Octavia Chen, a former Olympic athlete turned elite personal trainer. Octavia was all lean muscle and focused intensity, her Korean heritage evident in her striking features and her no-nonsense approach to physical conditioning. "You don't need to be smaller," Octavia told Vivienne during their first session in Helena's private gym. "You need to be stronger. Confidence lives in the body first, then radiates outward. We're going to teach your body that it deserves to take up space." The workouts were brutal. Weight training, boxing, yoga, and dance. Vivienne's muscles burned and her lungs screamed, but with each session she felt something shifting. Her posture changed first. Her shoulders rolled back. Her chin lifted. She began to walk, not with apology, but with purpose. Meanwhile, Helena worked on dismantling the psychological barriers Vivienne had constructed. They spent hours in conversation, with Helena challenging every self-deprecating thought, every moment of hesitation. "When you speak, you end statements as questions," Helena noted during one session. "You seek permission to exist." This stops now. "Your opinions are not suggestions. Your presence is not negotiable." Vivienne practiced speaking with authority. She recorded herself, listened back, adjusted. Her voice, which had been a tentative whisper for so long, found its natural register, lower and more resonant than she remembered. In the evenings, they worked on strategy. Vivienne revealed the full extent of her financial knowledge, and Helena brought in advisors who helped her establish her own investment firm. Hart Ventures would focus on sustainable urban development, the very field Marcus had mocked as impractical. The paperwork was filed quietly, registered under her maiden name. Marcus would know nothing until she was ready. 3 weeks into the transformation, Dmitry Volkov arrived from Moscow. The fashion designer was legendary for creating garments that were architecture for the human form. He was a small man with intense dark eyes and hands that moved with surgical precision. He studied Vivienne for a full hour before speaking. "You have been dressing like you want to vanish. We will create something that makes vanishing impossible, but it must reflect your truth, not fashion's demands. Tell me, Vivienne Hart, what is your power?" Vivienne thought carefully. "I see potential where others see problems. I understand how spaces and systems connect. I build things that last." Dmitry smiled slowly. "Then we dress you as an architect of your own destiny. Structure, yes, but with fluidity. Strength with grace. You will wear midnight green, the color of deep forests where new growth begins. The cut will be architectural, sharp lines that command attention. But the fabric will move like water because you are not rigid. You are transformation itself." The gown took 2 weeks to create, with multiple fittings where Dmitry adjusted every seam to perfection. When Vivienne finally saw herself in the completed dress, she barely recognized her reflection. The woman in the mirror stood tall, her honey-colored hair now cut in long layers that framed her face and cascaded down her back in waves. Her hazel eyes, emphasized with subtle makeup that Helena's beauty expert had taught her to apply, were luminous and direct. The midnight green gown hugged her newly toned figure before flowing to the floor in a cascade of silk that whispered with each movement. "This is not me," Vivienne whispered. "No," Helena corrected, standing beside her. "This is exactly you." For the first time, the outside matches the inside. Back in Chicago, Marcus had noticed her absences but assumed she was visiting old college friends or dealing with some charity obligation. He didn't ask for details. He never did. Vivienne had established a cover story through her assistant, feeding him just enough information to satisfy his minimal curiosity. She had also rented a small apartment in the West Loop under her maiden name, a space that became her headquarters. The walls were covered with plans for Hart Ventures, architectural renderings of sustainable housing projects, and financial projections that made her pulse quicken with excitement. This was her war room, and she was planning a campaign. Patricia Chambers, Marcus's mother, had been the only complication. The elegant 70-year-old had appeared at the Gold Coast mansion one afternoon, her disapproving gaze taking in Vivienne's absence. "Where has she been?" Patricia demanded of the housekeeper. "Marcus says she's been gone for weeks," but Vivienne had anticipated this. She arranged a lunch meeting with Patricia at the Peninsula Hotel, appearing in one of her old beige outfits, playing the role of dutiful daughter-in-law one last time. "I've been taking some personal development courses," Vivienne explained, her voice still soft. "I want to be a better representative of the Ashford name." Patricia had softened, even smiled. "That's very thoughtful, dear. Marcus could use a wife who understands the demands of his position." Vivienne had smiled back, thinking of the midnight green gown hanging in her secret apartment. If you only knew, the final week before the Founders' Ball was dedicated to rehearsal. Helena flew to Chicago and spent every day coaching Vivienne on how to work the room. They practiced conversations, how to parry questions, how to command attention without demanding it. "You will not seek Marcus out," Helena instructed. "You will not explain yourself. You will simply be, and the world will adjust to accommodate you. This is the power of someone who knows their worth." The night before the ball, Vivienne stood in her secret apartment, looking out at the Chicago skyline. Somewhere in one of those glittering towers, Marcus was probably working late, still believing his plain wife would show up tomorrow in something forgettable. Still thinking he had her contained and controlled, she touched the window, her reflection ghostly against the city lights. Tomorrow, she would walk into the Drake Hotel as Vivian Hart, not Vivian Ashford. She would reclaim the name her father had given her, the legacy Marcus thought he had absorbed and erased. "Thank you, Papa," she whispered to her reflection, "for teaching me that foundations matter. That what's built to last must start with truth. Tomorrow the truth would walk through those doors, and nothing would ever be the same." The Reckoning. The Drake Hotel ballroom glittered like a jewel box, chandeliers casting golden light over Chicago's most powerful elite. The Founders' Ball was the pinnacle of the city's social calendar, where fortunes were discussed over champagne and deals were sealed with handshakes worth millions. Marcus Ashford stood near the grand staircase, immaculate in his custom tuxedo, holding court with a circle of real estate developers and city officials. He had arrived alone as usual. When asked about his wife, he had offered his standard dismissive response. "Vivian's running late. You know how women are with these things. She'll slip in quietly through the side entrance, I'm sure." Graham Sinclair, his rival, had smirked knowingly. Both men understood that Marcus preferred his wife invisible, a necessary accessory kept carefully out of frame. Senator Richard Blackwell, a silver-haired statesman who had known Vivian's father, frowned slightly. "Shame you keep that girl hidden, Marcus. Jonathan Hart was one of the finest men I ever knew. His daughter has his intelligence, you know." Marcus barely suppressed an eye roll. "Of course, Senator. Vivian has many fine qualities." The words were automatic, meaningless. At precisely 8:30, a subtle shift occurred in the ballroom. Conversations didn't stop, but they stuttered. Heads began to turn toward the grand staircase like flowers following the sun. A murmur rippled through the crowd, starting as a whisper and building to an audible buzz of curiosity and surprise. Marcus glanced up impatiently, expecting some celebrity or foreign dignitary. Instead, his entire world tilted on its axis. A woman stood at the top of the marble staircase, one hand resting lightly on the balustrade. The midnight green gown she wore seemed to capture and transform the light, its architectural lines creating a silhouette that was both powerful and elegant. Her honey-colored hair fell in glossy waves over her shoulders, and her posture radiated the kind of confidence that couldn't be bought or faked. She descended slowly, each step measured and sure, her hazel eyes scanning the crowd with calm assessment. Marcus felt his mouth go dry. There was something familiar about the shape of her face, the line of her jaw. His mind rejected what his eyes were telling him, even as his heart began to pound with a recognition he didn't want to accept. "Good God," Graham Sinclair breathed beside him. "Who is that?" The woman reached the bottom of the staircase, and the photographers who had been half-heartedly snapping society matrons suddenly surged forward, cameras flashing like lightning. She didn't flinch or pose. She simply paused, allowing them their moment, a slight smile playing at her lips. Celeste Wu, the influential society journalist whose column could make or break reputations, appeared as if summoned. "Excuse me," she called out, her voice cutting through the commotion. "I don't believe we've met." Celeste Wu, Chicago Tribune. "And you are?" The woman's smile widened slightly, and when she spoke, her voice carried clearly across the suddenly hushed space. "Vivian Hart, it's lovely to be here." The name hit Marcus like a physical blow. He took an involuntary step backward, nearly stumbling. Graham grabbed his arm to steady him. "Hart?" Graham repeated, his eyes widening. "As in Jonathan Hart?" "Wait, you don't mean—" "That's my wife," Marcus whispered. The words scraped raw from his throat. "That's Vivian." The shock on Graham's face would have been comical under any other circumstances. "That's your wife? The one you said was plain? The one you hide at home?" But Marcus couldn't respond. He was watching Vivian move through the crowd with the ease of someone completely comfortable in her own skin. Senator Blackwell had reached her first, his face breaking into a genuine smile of recognition and delight. "Vivian Hart," the senator said, taking both her hands in his. "My dear girl, you look exactly like your mother did at your age. Absolutely radiant. I've been telling Marcus for years that he was a fool for keeping you tucked away." "Senator Blackwell," Vivian replied warmly. "How kind of you to say so." "I've been away, working on a project I'm quite excited about. Actually, I was hoping to speak with you this evening about sustainable housing initiatives. I've just launched an investment firm focused on urban renewal. The senator's eyebrows rose with interest. Have you indeed? I'd very much like to hear about it. The city desperately needs more vision in that sector. Marcus began pushing through the crowd toward them, his face flushed with a mixture of anger and confusion. How dare she? How dare she transform herself without his permission, launch a business without his knowledge, use her maiden name as if their marriage meant nothing? But before he could reach her, Vivian was surrounded by others. Catherine Bordeaux, the French consul general, was engaging her in rapid French, both women laughing at some shared observation. Then Thomas Chen, the reclusive tech billionaire who Marcus had been trying to court for months, was shaking Vivian's hand and listening intently as she explained something about green building materials and carbon-neutral construction. Mrs. Ashford? Marcus finally managed to cut in, his voice tight with barely controlled fury. A word, please. Vivian turned to him, and for a moment Marcus saw something in her eyes that made him falter. It wasn't fear or guilt. It was assessment, cool and clinical, as if she were evaluating a stranger. Mr. Ashford, she said evenly. How nice to see you. I hope you're enjoying the evening, Mr. Ashford. Not Marcus. Not darling. The formality was a slap. What is this? He hissed, trying to keep his voice low. What have you done to yourself? I've simply decided to stop hiding, Vivian replied, her voice calm. You wanted me presentable for these events. Here I am, being present. This is not what I meant, and you know it. You look... He struggled for words. You look like someone else entirely. Perhaps I always was someone else, and you simply never noticed. She tilted her head slightly. Excuse me, Marcus. The mayor's wife is signaling me. I believe she wants to discuss the community center project I'm proposing for the South Side. She turned and walked away, leaving him standing alone in the middle of the ballroom, impotent rage churning in his gut. The evening continued its surreal trajectory. Marcus watched, paralyzed, as his wife, his invisible, forgettable wife, became the center of gravity in the room. He heard snatches of conversation as he moved numbly through the crowd. Hart Ventures is her firm. $7 million in initial capital, all her own money. She's focusing on affordable housing with green technology, studied at Columbia, apparently, urban planning and architecture. Who knew? Speaks 3 languages fluently. I just heard her discussing French housing policy with the consul general. Each revelation was another nail in the coffin of the reality Marcus had constructed. He had married a simple girl, a convenient means to an end. He had been certain of this. The woman commanding this room was not simple. She was brilliant, accomplished, and utterly beyond his reach. Graham Sinclair appeared at his elbow, a whiskey in hand. Well, Marcus, he said, his voice thick with irony, I believe you said something at poker night about taking one for the team. About sacrifice? Marcus turned on him. Don't. I'm just saying, Graham continued, clearly enjoying himself. If that's what you consider a sacrifice, I'd love to see what you think success looks like. Near the terrace doors, Vivian stood in conversation with Senator Blackwell and Patricia Chambers. Marcus's mother had arrived late and was staring at her daughter-in-law with an expression of complete bewilderment. Vivian, dear, Patricia was saying, her voice faint, I had no idea you were planning such a transformation. It wasn't planned, Patricia, Vivian replied gently. It was remembered. I simply stopped pretending to be smaller than I am. Marcus approached them, his desperation overriding his pride. Mother, would you excuse us? I need to speak with my wife privately. Patricia looked between them, sensing the tension. Of course. Vivian, we must have lunch soon. I want to hear all about this new venture of yours. When they were alone on the terrace, Marcus rounded on Vivian. What game are you playing? No game, Marcus. I'm simply living my life. Your life? His voice rose. You're my wife. Your life is our life, is it? Vivian's gaze was steady. When exactly did we become a we? Was it when you called me a plain Jane to your friends? When you said keeping me out of the spotlight was a full-time job? When you told Graham Sinclair that marrying me was a sacrifice worth the property portfolio? Marcus felt the blood drain from his face. You heard that? Every word. Her voice didn't waver. You've spent 4 years treating me like an embarrassment, Marcus. Like something defective you were stuck with. I believed you for a while. I made myself small and quiet because I thought that's what I deserved. Vivienne, I'm not finished. The steel in her voice stopped him cold. Then I realized something. You're not the arbiter of my worth. You're just a man who was so focused on his own reflection that he never bothered to see what was standing right beside him. That's not my failure. It's yours. So this is what? Revenge? Marcus demanded. You parade around here making me look like a fool? You made yourself look like a fool, Marcus. All I did was stop hiding. She stepped closer, and he saw something in her eyes that made him understand, finally, what he had lost. I'm filing for divorce. Hart Ventures is entirely separate from Ashford Properties. Your waterfront parcels are safe. That merger your father-in-law arranged died with him. You'll keep what you gained. I'll keep what was always mine. You can't, Marcus started, but the words died in his throat because he knew she could. She absolutely could. I can and I will. Tomorrow, my lawyers will contact yours. It will be clean and quick. You'll cooperate because the alternative is very public litigation, and I have documentation of every cruel word, every dismissal, every humiliation. Chicago's sympathies will not be with you. Marcus felt panic rising. Wait. Vivienne, we can discuss this. If I was harsh, if I didn't appreciate, you didn't appreciate me because you never saw me. You saw a transaction, a means to an end, and for 4 years I let you. She smiled, and it was sad but resolute. Not anymore. She turned to leave, then paused. Thank you, actually. For what? He asked bitterly. For underestimating me so completely that I had no choice but to prove you wrong. You gave me the motivation to become exactly who I was meant to be. As she walked back into the ballroom, Marcus remained on the terrace, his hands gripping the stone balustrade. Through the glass doors, he watched Vivienne accept a glass of champagne from Senator Blackwell, watched her laugh at something Thomas Chin said, watched the room rearrange itself around her presence. He had wanted an invisible wife. He had gotten one. What he hadn't realized was that invisibility was armor, and under that armor, a warrior had been patiently sharpening her sword. The months that followed confirmed what that night had initiated. The divorce was swift and dignified. Vivienne kept her maiden name and her independence. Hart Ventures flourished, with Vivienne's sustainable housing projects gaining national attention. She appeared on the cover of Architecture Digest, was featured in Forbes, and gave a TED Talk on urban renewal that went viral. Marcus watched from a distance, his empire still intact but his ego permanently scarred. At business functions, people asked about his ex-wife with admiration and respect. Graham Sinclair never let him forget it. You had a treasure, Graham remarked once, and you locked it in a vault and forgot about it. Can't say I feel sorry for you, Marcus. He was right, of course. Marcus had possessed something extraordinary and had been too blind to see it. He had wanted Vivienne invisible, and she had obliged. But invisibility was only temporary. The woman she truly was had simply been waiting for the right moment to emerge, and when she did, she didn't just emerge, she blazed. The end.